Most people will never say it out loud. They will think it in the car on the way home from somewhere they smiled through. They will feel it in the quiet moments between the doing of things when there is nothing left to distract from the voice that has been there for longer than they can remember. They will carry it through relationships that look healthy from the outside, and through accomplishments that were supposed to fix it, and through seasons of faith that brought everything else but somehow left this particular thing untouched. They will not say it out loud because saying it out loud feels like the kind of confession that cannot be taken back. Like naming it makes it more real than it already is. Like the admission of it reveals something so fundamental and so unflattering about who they are that the people in their life would not be able to look at them the same way if they knew. But right now, in this space, with just this conversation between you and wherever you are, I want to give the thing a name. I do not even like myself. Not I have low self-esteem, which is clinical enough to feel manageable. Not I struggle with confidence, which is relatable enough to be socially acceptable. Not I am working on loving myself, which is aspirational enough to suggest you are already moving in the right direction. The raw version. The one that lives underneath all the acceptable framings. I do not even like myself. If that sentence landed somewhere true in you, if something in you recognized it not as a concept, but as a companion that has been traveling with you, then this conversation is for you. All of it. And I want you to stay. Because what I want to talk about today is not a self-help reframe. It is not a positivity exercise. It is not a program for building a better relationship with your own reflection. It is something more honest and more costly and more real than any of that. I want to talk about what it actually looks like to be healed at the level where the not liking lives. And I want to talk about where that healing actually comes from. Let me start by asking you something that might be harder than it sounds. When did it start? Not the self-criticism. That probably has roots you could trace if you followed them far enough. I mean, the specific quality of the not liking, the felt sense of yourself as someone fundamentally less than, as someone who, when examined honestly, does not quite measure up to whatever the standard is that has been living in the background of your self-evaluation for as long as you can remember. For some people, the not liking started with a voice, literally. A specific person whose words about who you were and what you were worth became the primary text you read yourself through. A parent whose approval was conditional in ways that taught you your acceptability was always provisional. A sibling whose comparison was constant and always landed in the same direction. A teacher, a coach, a peer group, a romantic partner whose particular form of criticism found the place in you that was most susceptible to it and stayed there long after the person was gone. For some people, it started with an experience. Something that happened that you did not have the resources to process correctly at the age it happened. Something that produced a conclusion about yourself that made sense given what you understood at the time, even though it was not accurate. Children who are hurt or abandoned or neglected or shamed almost universally conclude that the problem is them, not the adult who failed them, not the circumstance that was genuinely unfair. Them. Their unworthiness, their insufficiency, their being too much or not enough in some fundamental way that caused or deserved what happened. For some people, it started with failure. A specific failure that was significant enough and visible enough that you could not find a way to separate yourself from it. The failure became evidence, and the evidence became a verdict. And the verdict became the lens through which every subsequent piece of information about yourself was filtered. The successes minimized or discounted, the mistakes amplified and confirmed, the lens doing what lenses do, which is make everything look consistent with what it is already looking for. And for some people, it did not start with anything they can clearly name. It was simply always there, a background frequency, the ambient noise of their interior life, a relationship with themselves that was never particularly warm and never became warm, and at some point stopped seeming like something that was supposed to be different. Whatever form the beginning took for you, it was not inevitable. It was not the truth about you revealing itself. It was information arriving in a context where you did not yet have the tools to evaluate it correctly. And the work of healing begins not with trying to think yourself into liking yourself, but with understanding, honestly and specifically, what the not liking is actually made of. Let me talk about what not liking yourself actually does to your life, because it is not just an internal experience. It shapes everything. It shapes your relationships. When you do not like yourself at a fundamental level, you carry a secret into every relationship you enter. The secret is that you are not sure you are worth the investment. That if this person really knew you, the full version, the interior version, the version that exists when the performance is down, they would revise their opinion downward. And so you manage, you curate what they see, you work to earn the continued presence of people whose love you are not sure you deserve, which is a different thing from simply being in relationship with them. And the exhaustion of that managing, sustained over time, is one of the primary reasons that people who do not like themselves often feel most alone inside the relationships that are supposed to provide the most connection. It shapes your ambition. When you do not like yourself, you often develop one of two relationships with achievement. Either you use achievement as the primary strategy for generating something that resembles self-worth, which means you need to keep achieving because the worth disappears with the achievement, or you sabotage. You get close to things that matter and find a way to dismantle them, because somewhere below the level of conscious intention, you believe that the good things are not actually for you, that you will eventually be discovered as someone who did not deserve what they were given. And so you take yourself out before someone else can. It shapes your relationship with God. And this is the part that I want to spend the most time with today, because the not liking yourself creates a specific distortion in how you understand and receive what God thinks of you. You hear the words about being loved and chosen and made with intention, and you believe them, abstractly, for other people, in a general theological sense, but they do not land in the specific, particular, applied to you way they are meant to land, because the not liking creates a filter, and the filter says, yes, but, yes, loved, but not you specifically, not as you actually are, not if they could see the interior, not without conditions that you have not yet managed to meet. And the healing that is possible, the real healing, not the surface kind, has to address that filter, has to get underneath the yes but, has to find the specific place where the love is not being received and do the work that allows it to finally land. I want to say something here that might sound simple and is actually one of the most important things in this entire conversation. Not liking yourself is not the same as seeing yourself clearly. This matters enormously because the primary defense of the not liking is always that it is accurate, that the self-criticism is not distortion but honesty, that you are simply being realistic about your own limitations and failures and qualities in a way that other people, through politeness or love or limited information, are not willing to be. That if anything, the not liking is the most honest relationship with yourself available. That the people who like themselves are operating under a flattering illusion and you are simply in possession of the unedited truth. That defense is wrong, and it is wrong in a specific way that is important to understand. The self that you are evaluating when you are in the not liking is not the full self. It is a selected self. The not liking is not a comprehensive, balanced, accurate assessment of everything you are. It is a spotlight that has been trained on the parts of you that confirm the verdict, while leaving in shadow everything that would complicate or contradict it. It sees every failure with full resolution and every strength in soft focus. It remembers every mistake with the clarity of a photograph and every genuine good thing you have done or been as something that can be explained away. The people who love you, whose testimonies you dismiss because they are biased. The moments of genuine beauty in your character that you write off as exceptions that do not count toward the overall picture. This is not honesty. This is a bias so familiar and so long-standing that it has disguised itself as the neutral truth. And recognizing it as a bias rather than as the unfiltered reality of what you are is one of the first and most important steps in the healing. You are not seeing yourself clearly when you do not like what you see. You are seeing yourself through a lens that was constructed under specific conditions, often painful ones, and that has never been examined with the same rigor it applies to everything else about you. Let me talk about God's eyes, not as a theological concept, as something that is trying to be practically real in the life of a person who does not like what they see when they look at themselves. Because there is a version of the God's eyes conversation that stays completely in the abstract and does essentially nothing for the person receiving it. You are wonderfully made. God sees you as chosen and beloved. You are precious in His sight. These things are true. And they bounce off the surface of the not liking like water off glass, because the not liking has a very effective response to all of them. That is what God is supposed to say. That is not the same as it being specifically and particularly and actually true of me as I actually am. So I want to come at this differently. I want to talk about what it would mean to be seen the way you most need to be seen. Not described from the outside. Seen. Really seen. The interior version. The parts you have been carefully keeping out of view. The contradictions and the failures and the things you are least proud of, and the hopes that feel too fragile to say out loud, and the specific, particular person that exists when there is no audience. What would it mean to be seen at that level, fully, with nothing edited out? And to find that the seeing does not produce withdrawal, does not produce the revised opinion you have been afraid of, does not confirm the verdict the not liking has been operating from. That is what the healing through God's eyes actually is. Not a theological statement, an experience. The lived, interior, sometimes gradual and sometimes sudden experience of being known completely and found in the complete knowing to be something other than what the not liking insists you are. And that experience is available, not only to people who have already resolved the self-esteem issue, not only to people who have done enough inner work to be considered spiritually mature enough to receive it. It is available to the person who is in the thick of the not liking right now, who cannot yet see what God sees, who cannot yet feel the love as specifically and particularly directed at them, who is, right now, genuinely unable to be in their own skin without the soundtrack of the not liking running underneath everything. The experience begins not with you successfully seeing yourself through God's eyes. It begins with you being willing to consider that God's eyes see something your eyes do not. Let me stop here for a moment and ask you to do something. I want you to think about one person in your life, just one, who you genuinely love. Not someone you have complicated feelings about, someone whose existence you are glad of, someone whose face, when you think of it, produces something warm in you. Now think about the way you see that person, not their highlight reel. You know their limitations, you know their failures, you know the places where they have fallen short or made mistakes or been less than they wanted to be. You are not blind to any of that. And hold in your mind the fact that none of that changed the fundamental quality of what you feel about them. The knowing of their imperfection did not revoke the love. The seeing of their failure did not reduce them in your eyes to only their failure. They are more than their worst moments to you. They are more than their limitations. The love you have for them is not contingent on them successfully hiding everything difficult about themselves. It exists alongside the full picture. Now, I want you to consider the possibility that the way you see that person is closer to the way you are seen than anything the not liking has ever told you. Not identical, but in the same family, the same quality of seeing, the kind that holds the whole picture and loves the whole picture. Not just the presentable parts, the whole thing. You do not have to believe that fully yet. You do not have to feel it. Just consider it. Just let it sit in the room with the not liking without immediately dismissing it. Because the considering is where the healing has room to begin. I want to talk about the mirror, not the physical mirror, the internal one, the running commentary that provides a constant evaluation of everything you do, say, think, attempt, and fail at. The voice that is always there, always evaluating, almost never impressed. For people who do not like themselves, that internal mirror has a very specific quality to it. It holds a higher standard for you than it holds for anyone else. It interprets the same behavior differently depending on whether it is coming from you or from someone else. When someone you love makes a mistake, the internal mirror tends toward understanding, toward context, toward the recognition that they are human and humans make mistakes and one mistake does not define a person. When you make the same mistake, the internal mirror does not extend the same grace. It holds you to a standard of consistency and correctness that no human being is capable of meeting. And then it uses your failure to meet that standard as evidence for the verdict it was already holding. This double standard is one of the most revealing signs of a self-relationship that has gone wrong, and it is also one of the most practically addressable ones. Not immediately, not through a single decision to apply the same grace to yourself that you apply to others, but through the repeated, patient practice of noticing when the double standard is operating and asking the question, would I say this to someone I love? Would I interpret this the same way if it were about them? And when the answer is no, and it will frequently be no, that no is information, that no is the gap between what is fair and what you're currently doing to yourself. And slowly, imperfectly, with many setbacks, that gap can be narrowed. Not by lowering your standards, by extending to yourself the same basic human grace that you extend to every other human being in your life almost automatically. You deserve the same grace you give away. That is not a radical claim. It is the most basic form of consistency available, and practicing it is one of the most significant acts of healing you can undertake. Let me talk about the body, because the not liking yourself very often includes the not liking of the specific physical form you inhabit, and the relationship between self-worth and body image is complicated and layered in ways that deserve honest attention. For many people, the body is where the not liking is most acute, where it is most visible and most difficult to avoid. Because the body is the thing you cannot change by deciding to. It changes slowly. It carries the evidence of time and stress and the choices you made when you were coping with things you did not yet have better tools for. And the culture you live in has very specific, very narrow ideas about what bodies are supposed to look like, and those ideas are everywhere, all the time, offering a constant comparison that almost no one's actual body can win. And so the body becomes a primary site of the not liking, a source of shame that is renewed every morning when you get dressed, and every time you see your reflection, and every time you are in a space where other people's bodies are visible, and you cannot help but notice the distance between theirs and the standard the culture has defined. I want to say something about this carefully and directly. Your body is not the enemy. It is the vehicle through which your entire experience of being alive happens. Every moment of beauty you have ever perceived, every connection you have ever felt, every act of love you have ever given or received, every experience of meaning or joy or peace that has ever been available to you, was available to you through this body. The body you are in judgment of is also the body that has carried you through everything you have ever survived. That has kept you alive through the seasons where staying alive required more than you knew you had. It deserves something other than the ongoing verdict the not liking delivers about it. Not because it meets the standard. It does not have to meet the standard. The standard is not the authority on what your body is worth. Your body's worth is not located in its proximity to an external ideal. It is located in the simple, radical, countercultural fact that it is yours. That it is the one and only vessel through which you exist in the world. And that existence itself, your specific, particular, irreplaceable existence in this body, is not a problem to be solved. It is a gift, even when it does not feel like one. Even when the not liking is loudest about it. Even then. Let me talk about what healing actually looks like in practice. Not as a destination you arrive at, as a process you inhabit. Because healing from the not liking is not a switch. It is not a moment where the internal voice changes its script and the self you have been at war with suddenly becomes a self you are at peace with. That is not how it works. And expecting it to work that way is one of the reasons people give up on the process before the process has had time to produce anything real. Healing looks like noticing the voice and choosing, slowly and imperfectly, not to take its assessments as the final word. Not silencing it, because you cannot silence it through effort, you can only give it less authority. The noticing is the beginning, the moment when you observe the not liking doing its work and recognize it as the not liking rather than as the truth. That gap between the voice and the belief, between the judgment and the agreement with the judgment, is where everything begins. Healing looks like the practice of finding one true, non-defensive thing about yourself each day, not a grand affirmation, not a positive statement designed to override the negative ones. A specific, honest, true thing. I showed up for someone today. I told the truth when the lie would have been easier. I tried something that was hard for me. I was kind in a moment when I did not have to be. Small, specific, true. and letting it exist alongside the not liking without having to defeat the not liking in order to count. Healing looks like allowing people to love you without immediately disqualifying their love, without explaining to them why they would feel differently if they knew more, without holding their affection at arm's length because you do not believe you have earned it, just receiving it, imperfectly, awkwardly, without having to be sure you deserve it first. Because the receiving of love, even when it is uncomfortable, even when every instinct says you should redirect or minimize or explain it away, is one of the primary mechanisms through which the not liking begins to lose its grip. Healing looks like getting the real version of yourself into a room, even a small room, even a room of one person, where it can be seen and not destroyed, where the hiding can stop, even briefly, and the survival of the stopping can become evidence that being known is not the catastrophe the not liking has been insisting it would be. I want to talk about the role of community in healing from the not liking, because this is one of the places people consistently underestimate what is needed and what is possible. There is a belief, very common among people who do not like themselves, that community and relationship are things to be protected from the reality of your interior life. That other people's continued presence depends on the continued successful management of what they see. That the relationship is conditional on the performance, even if the performance is not a lie exactly, just a selected version of the truth. And the consequence of that belief is that the relationships never actually get to do what relationships are designed to do. They stay at the level of the performance. They are warm and real on the surface and fundamentally lonely underneath, because the part of you that most needs to be in the relationship is the part that is being kept out of it. Real community, the kind that actually participates in healing, requires a different kind of risk. The risk of letting someone see the not liking. Not every part of it at once. Not recklessly, but genuinely. The risk of saying to one person, in one honest moment, something that gives them access to the actual interior. Something that could change how they see you if the not liking is right about what seeing would produce, and then staying for what they do with it. Not curating their response or dismissing it before it can land, actually receiving it, letting their continued presence after the seeing be information, letting their response to the real you be data about whether the not liking's prediction was accurate. Almost always, it is not. Almost always, the person who is allowed to see something real responds with something that contradicts the verdict, not necessarily with eloquence, not always with the exact right words, but with continued presence, with warmth that does not shift when the real thing is revealed, with the simple, profound act of staying. And that staying is one of the most powerful healing experiences available to a human being, not because it solves the not liking, but because it provides lived, embodied, specific evidence that the not liking's fundamental claim, that the real you is something people cannot survive seeing, is not true. Let one person stay, find one person and let them stay. That is the beginning. I want to address something that is woven through almost every experience of not liking yourself, and that is the relationship between the not liking and your mistakes. Specifically, the mistakes that feel most defining, the ones you have not been able to forgive yourself for, the ones that live in the back of your mind with a permanence that your successes do not have, the ones that the not liking returns to regularly as its most convincing evidence. There is a pattern that almost everyone who struggles with not liking themselves shares. They hold their own mistakes to a different standard of permanence than they hold anyone else's. When someone they love makes a mistake, they can see the mistake as a chapter, as a thing that happened that does not define the whole of the person. But their own mistakes do not get that grace. Their own mistakes become identity. They become proof of something that was always true. They become the foundational evidence in the case against themselves that the not liking has been building for years. This is not accountability. This is punishment. And the difference is important. Accountability says I did something that caused harm, and I am taking responsibility for the harm, and I am committed to being different going forward. Accountability has an after. It leads somewhere. It produces change and movement and the kind of genuine repair that is possible when a mistake is met with honest reckoning. Punishment says, the mistake is the permanent truth about who I am, and no amount of change or repair or genuine growth changes the fundamental verdict it revealed. Punishment has no after. It just has more of the same, more evidence, more proof, more confirmation of the sentence that was rendered. If you have been punishing yourself for something, if there is a specific thing that lives in you as the reason you cannot fully like yourself, I want to ask you something. What would accountability without punishment look like for that thing? What would it mean to be genuinely responsible for it without being permanently defined by it? What would it take to let it be a chapter rather than a verdict? You do not have to answer that fully right now, but the question is worth sitting with. Because the healing from the not liking almost always passes through this specific territory, through the specific mistakes that have been given the most defining power, and through the work of receiving the grace for them that you have extended to almost everyone else in your life except yourself. Let me speak to the relationship between the not liking and faith specifically, because for people who have a faith life, the not liking creates a very particular kind of pain that secular conversations about self-worth often miss entirely. When you do not like yourself, and you also believe in a God who loves you, you end up holding two things that do not reconcile easily: the belief that you are loved and the lived experience of feeling fundamentally unworthy of that love. And the attempt to hold both of those things at once without the tools to integrate them produces a very specific kind of exhaustion. You perform the belief. You say the right things. You engage with the theological framework of your own worth as something you have intellectually accepted, while the interior experience remains largely unchanged. And there is a quiet shame in that gap. The shame of knowing that the truth you believe has not yet reached the part of you it is most supposed to reach. The shame of being unable to receive what you are supposed to know is freely given. And the not liking uses that gap as additional evidence. You cannot even get this right. You have heard the truth about your worth and you still do not feel it. What does that say about you? I want to name that loop clearly so you can see it for what it is. The not liking is using your inability to immediately feel healed as proof that you are beyond healing. And that is not information. That is the not liking protecting itself. The gap between the theological belief and the interior experience is not evidence that the belief is wrong or that you are uniquely unable to receive it. It is evidence that receiving something that contradicts a deeply held internal belief is a process, not an event. It takes time. It takes the slow accumulation of experiences that confirm the truth from the inside rather than just asserting it from the outside. It takes the patient, often unglamorous work of allowing what is true to land in a nervous system and a psyche that have been organized around a different story for a very long time. The belief is ahead of the experience right now. That is not failure. That is the beginning of the process. And the process, given time and the right conditions, catches up. I want to give you something concrete to carry out of this conversation. Not a list of affirmations to repeat, not a program to complete. 3 real, specific, honest practices that actually move the needle on the not liking over time. The first practice is the practice of the specific true thing. Every day, not as a performance, find one specific, honest, non-defensive true thing about yourself. Not a general quality like I am a good person, which is too broad to be felt. Something specific, something that happened today or this week. I told someone the truth when it would have been easier to say what they wanted to hear. I showed up for something hard and I did not leave. I made someone feel less alone by staying in a conversation they needed. I created something. I persevered through something. I loved something or someone well. Small, specific, true. And then let it exist. Do not immediately counter it. Do not minimize it by comparison to all the things you did not do or were not. Just let it be a true thing about you for today. You can be a person who does not like themselves and also a person who told the truth in a hard moment. Both of those things can be true. And letting them both be true without one immediately cancelling the other is the practice. The second practice is the practice of receiving without deflecting. This week, when someone says something kind or affirming or loving about you, try this. Do not immediately minimize it. Do not redirect it. Do not explain why they are wrong, or why it does not count, or why they would feel differently if they knew more. Just receive it. Say thank you. Let the words land somewhere in you before the not liking has a chance to intercept them. You do not have to believe it fully. You do not have to feel worthy of it. Just let it come in. Just for a moment, and see what happens in the space between the receiving and the disqualifying. That space is where the healing happens, and it expands slowly with practice. The third practice is the practice of one honest conversation. This week, find one person who has given you some reason to believe they are safe, and tell them one true thing about the not liking, not the whole story, not the depths of it. One true thing, something like, I have a really hard time being kind to myself, or I have never really liked who I am and I am not sure why, or simply, I struggle more with this than anyone knows, and then stay for what they do with it. Let the conversation happen, let their response be what it is, and let the survival of that conversation, whatever form it takes, be evidence that being known in this does not have to be the catastrophe the not liking has been predicting. One true thing, one received kindness, one honest conversation. That is the beginning of healing through God's eyes, not because the practices are magic, but because they are the specific movements that open the places where the love has not yet been able to land. I want to close with something that I need you to actually hear, not as a concept, not as a nice way to end a conversation, as something specifically and particularly and actually true of you. The version of you that exists right now, not the improved version, not the version that has done enough work to be considered healed, not the version that has resolved the not liking and arrived at something that looks more like peace. The version that is sitting with this right now, that has been carrying the not liking for as long as it has been carried, that is tired and complicated and imperfect in the specific ways that you are imperfect. That version is already fully seen, not evaluated and found adequate, not assessed and determined to be acceptable pending further improvement. Seen, completely, without the curating, without the performance. The interior version, the one you have been most afraid to let anyone see, is the one that is most completely known. And in that complete knowing, the response is not what the not liking has been insisting it would be. It is not withdrawal, it is not revised opinion, it is not confirmation of the verdict. It is something that the not liking does not have a framework for, because the not liking has been operating on the assumption that being fully seen leads to being fully rejected. And the healing through God's eyes is the lived, interior, slowly received experience of discovering that assumption is wrong. You are not what the not liking says you are. You are not the sum of your failures and your limitations and the mistakes that still live in you as evidence. You are a specific, particular, irreplaceable human being whose existence is not accidental and whose worth is not conditional, and whose healing is not contingent on first achieving a level of self-improvement sufficient to deserve it. The healing is available to you now, in this moment, as you actually are. You do not have to like yourself yet in order to begin receiving the love that is trying to teach you how. You just have to stay in the conversation, stay in the process, stay open to the possibility that what is true about you is larger and more beautiful and more worthy of love than the not liking has ever been willing to show you. Stay and let yourself be seen, because what gets seen when you stop hiding is not the worst thing about you. It is the truest thing about you, and the truest thing about you is worth knowing.